Hello, so we're going to be looking at Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is the material in Chapter 11 is almost entirely absent from the first edition of Maurizio. So this was a new edition. I think um, people were asked to review the first edition, and I imagine that many said that the failure to really have sort of a chapter on Heracles, the greatest of the Greek heroes, was an oversight, and so that has been corrected with the second edition, which I think is a good call. And this chapter overall is a pretty good chapter. So there we have the material, um, and so the hero here is going to the background section leading to the uh, selection from Euripides' play Heracles. Um, so Heracles and Theseus and Perseus are all heroes who basically deal with the monster, and the monster is sort of at the edge of society of civilization, and needs to be tamed or conquered. This is sort of a common feature with some heroes. Now, Achilles is not that type of hero, right? Achilles is a warrior hero. Odysseus is a hero who does deal with monsters, but he's primarily, a hero who wants to get home, and his fighting monsters is not really the key thing. It's just that he travels, and he travels to the edge of the world, so he sees monsters. The uh, and the defeat of the monster reinforces cultural norms, right? Because the hero represents us and represents sort of normality, as opposed to the monster that is something outside of that. Heracles' first labor, right? He gets the 12 labors. These tasks he has to complete. In most accounts, he has to do that to pay off for the fact that he, in a fit of madness, killed his wife and their kids. And the Nemean lion, Nemea was one of the sort of important city centers in the Greek world. There were athletic contests held there every 2 years. They were not as important as the Olympic Games, but they were important games. And the lion, this monstrous lion, is attacking, the city of Nemea, and Heracles has to go and basically make life safe for the city dwellers by killing the lion. Theseus, of course, deals with the Minotaur, and the Minotaur, again, is a figure that's outside the norm, right? He's part bull and part human. He is the child of Minos's wife, who gives birth to him after having sex with this bull that Poseidon sends from the sea. So Perseus, of course, deals with Medusa. Now, Medusa lives at the edge of civilization. Perseus is basically commanded to go and do that deed. She is, my understanding, no immediate threat to civilization. It's just that this is an important monster at the edge of civilization, so Perseus goes, to deal with it. Heracles he's a complicated character. Here it says the idealized Greek male paragon. In the sense of strength, yes, but Heracles is lots of things. Heracles is in many myths, is a figure of appetite. This is a guy who eats a lot, drinks a lot, has a lot of sex with a lot of women. And so that side of Heracles, I think, is not meant to be a model for people to follow. Rather, it shows the sort of appetites unleashed. He also is a figure who travels around, so that's important to the Greeks. He does sort of serve as a defender of civilization. That becomes more important. And then the Stoics, the philosophical movement, the Stoics, they adopt Heracles as one of their own, with a story where Heracles is at a crossroads. And of course, crossroads, you have to make a choice. Are you going to take path A or path B? Well, path A is the easy path, and it's beautiful, and there's a beautiful woman there. And then path B is this mountainous path. It's going to be very difficult, and the woman there is very sort of athletic, sort of urging him to take that path. He chooses to take that path, the path of virtue. And from the Stoic point of view, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do your duty rather than just have a good time. But that is a later Heracles. The earlier Heracles is a lot like the Robert Howard character, Conan the Barbarian. He's a great fighter, but he also is a person who gives into his appetites a lot. These are sketches of metopes on the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. So this Olympia is where the Olympic Games were held. There was a Temple of Zeus there, and on the outside of the temple, there were these things that, if you grew up Catholic, are somewhat like the Stations of the Cross. These are little panels that are on the outside of the temple, and there are 12 of them, and they represent the 12 labors of Heracles. They are damaged, and if you look at these sketches, the part that is darkest is the part that we actually have, and then the part that is either not filled in or is lighter, that is the part that has been reconstructed. So, for instance, in the Nemean lion, we've got Heracles, the lion. He's got his foot on the lion. He's defeated the lion. Behind him, that's supposed to be Hermes, because we can see the hat. And then next, there's also Athena in that. So it's an impressive sort of set of figures. The metopes on the temples that have them. Not every temple has them. They have to be Doric temples. They have to have a particular architectural structure to have these. But the ones that do, they're often sort of related. So Heracles, there are a vast number of myths. There are myths of Heracles all over the Mediterranean. He has adventures in Spain. He has adventures in Italy. He has adventures in Sicily. He has adventures in North Africa. He has, so all over the place. In Troy, he actually attacks the city of Troy in the generation before the Trojan War, because he'd been cheated or something, and he raises an army and forces the Trojans to pay up. He doesn't destroy the city, but he does sort of get rid of the king, and then Priam becomes the new king. At that point, he's a young man, and in the Iliad, of course, Priam's an old man. So it's 50 years or so earlier is when Heracles lives. His mother is Alcmene. His father is Zeus. Alcmene's husband is Amphitryon, and the story goes that Zeus was had a hankering for Alcmene. Alcmene generally is portrayed as being loyal to her husband, and so what Zeus did was he disguised himself as Amphitryon, and they had sex. She was already pregnant with a child, Iphicles, who is Amphitryon's son, and Zeus managed to make sure that Iphicles and Heracles were born at the same time, so born as sort of twins, to at least lessen the possible scandal of her having like one kid and then a few months later having a second kid, even though physically that's actually impossible. But Hera does not like Heracles and goes after him. She can't really go after Alcmene because Alcmene, in a sense, did nothing wrong. She thought she was sleeping with her husband when she went to bed with Zeus. Hera, in Euripides' account, causes Heracles to go mad and kill his family. And in most versions of the story, he then goes to the Oracle at Delphi to be purified, because he's, that's blood guilt, and he has to get that off him. And the Oracle tells him that he has to perform these labors in atonement, and he will be the servant of Eurystheus, who is a king in southern Greece, in the Peloponnese. And these 12 labors, by the way, are called athloi. Now that's interesting for the following reason. The ordinary Greek word for a job, a task, is ergon, like we get ergonomics from that. The plural would be erga. And Heracles does hundreds of heroic things around the world, not just these 12 things. All of his other exploits are called par erga, side jobs. So even the people who were telling the story of Heracles understand that the 12 labors, are special. And athlos doesn't generally mean a job. What it means is it's an athletic contest in which you compete to win a prize. In this case, the prize that he wins is he becomes immortal. He actually goes to Olympus and marries Hebe, the goddess of youth. There are shrines of Heracles and temples of Heracles all over the Mediterranean world. So here we've got a red figure vase of baby Heracles. He has just killed the serpents. You can sort of see the one serpent just below him. He is the figure on the left. Baby Iphicles is crying for his mama, Alcmena, who is off to the side on the right side, and then with the sword drawn on the other side of that little bed is Amphitryon, who's come in to see what's going on when he hears Iphicles screaming. Interestingly enough, we've got Athena here, right? Woman with helmet. It's Athena. She is not ordinarily associated with baby Hercules or Heracles. She sort of enters that story later. This is a statue of a youthful Heracles. This would be after he's defeated the Nemean lion. The ways you can generally tell Heracles in ancient art, is he often has a club. This guy's got a club. Club is not an ordinary weapon for Greek heroes, right? They generally they're going to use swords or bow and arrow. And Heracles also is often shown with a bow and arrow. Not here. But the club makes him more like a caveman type figure. So he appears to represent a Greek hero probably prior to the Indo-European invasion, even, that sort of just hung on and then becomes a hero in the Indo-Europeanized Greece of later times. And over the other arm, he's got the lion skin that's draped. So the lion skin, he often is wearing the lion skin. Here he's just got it draped over his arm, but that again is a marker. Again, that connects him with animals. He's sort of a tamer of animals, especially monstrous animals. But that's also unusual because most of the heroes are fighting against humanoid and generally human opponents. This is a beardless Heracles, so this would be Heracles at age 18 or something, so he's basically a teenager here. So Heracles, master of animals. He confronts animals on more than any other hero. And lions, for instance, lions appear in Greek art, but there are no lions in Greece. And so it is sort of interesting. The Greeks saw lions elsewhere, and that became sort of something that they incorporated in their artwork, but that makes the lion sort of a monstrous animal because it's not native to Greece. And so his origins, he has a connection with other master of animals figures. So these are the sort of cavemen figures. This would be sort of like the figure of Enkidu in the Gilgamesh epic. He's associated more with animals than with humans. Now, Walter Burkert is a famous scholar of Greek religion mainly, and he touches on this as well. um, and one thing that before going on to mention is the name Heracles. The name of Heracles means glory of Hera. That's literally what the name means. Hera and Claes means glory. This is the kleos, right? Fame, reputation. So Heracles, glory of Hera. What's that all about? Some think that the original Heracles was actually not the opponent of the goddess, but was the servant of the goddess, was the goddess's hero. So serving the goddess. So prior to the Indo-Europeans, the figure of the goddess would have been a more important figure, would not have been demonized at that point, and the goddess would have a champion, and that champion, and Heracles. That then makes sense, right? He would be dealing with all these monsters to show that he's worthy of the goddess, rather like knights in medieval literature, right? They have to do all these deeds to show they're worthy of the lady's love. But then Hera becomes this figure who hates Zeus's, flings on the side, and then it changes to Hera going after poor Heracles. Vladimir Prop. We do not get a selection from Prop's morphology. That does appear in the first edition. Prop's work, it's very short. I mean, I think the entire work is maybe like 100 pages. It's not a long work, but it reads like a math book. I actually have read the English translation. The Kansas City Public Library used to have a copy, and I read it, and it is very difficult to follow. It is like reading a dense math book if you're not math inclined. What Prop did is he looked at 100 Russian quest stories. So there was like encyclopedia of Russian folklore, and that had a couple thousand stories, and 100 of those stories, and he numbers them. It's not like 1 to 100. It's like 300 to 301 to 400 or something. It's more in the middle. But those stories are all quest stories. The hero is going on an adventure to get something, right? That's what a quest is. Missions, like Mission Impossible, those are all quest stories because they're on a mission to do something. He basically looked at those stories and he noticed two things. One, there were 7 character types in these stories. Not all 7 appear. Some of the character types could be like one person could do 2 character roles. But you'd have the hero, of course. You'd have the prize, which is the thing the hero's going for, which is often a princess, but doesn't have to be. You would have a dispatcher, the person who sends the guy on the mission. You would have a donor who gives him something to help him, deal with the mission. And those two can be the same. The guy who sends him on the mission might also give him something. If you think of like James Bond movies, M is the guy who sends Bond on the mission. Q would be the guy who gives him like the toys, right? So, but they both work for MI6. So, in a sense, they're on the same team. And then, of course, there's an opponent to the hero. So there are 7 of those character types. And there are 31, he called them functions. These are narrative elements in the story. So they are things like the hero is called to go on the mission. Right? That's one of them. The hero is given a special, talisman. That's another one. The hero is told not to do something. So there are 31 of these. Prop pointed out that the story format is the same for all of these quest stories. Not all have 31 functions. In fact, I don't think anyone has all 31. But they all follow the same pattern, so that there are certain functions that are at the beginning, there are certain in the middle, there are certain at the end, and those always follow that same pattern. And if you think of like TV shows, like all the Star Trek universe, like the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, they all follow the same sort of narrative arc. Now, Deep Space Nine is a much darker show than Next Generation, but they still follow the same sort of pattern. And so Prop is basically using a structuralist way of looking at, like, how is the story structured. So it's worth looking at the summary of Prop. Reading Prop is another thing altogether. I mean, unless you're going into some serious folklore studies, you don't really need to do that. So Heracles' labors, a lot of them involve animals. The very first one of the labors involves the Nemean lion. The Nemean lion has bulletproof skin, and so Heracles can't really defeat it using his bow and arrow because the arrows just bounce off. But what he does is he gets the lion in a headlock and basically strangles the lion, kills the lion. Then he uses the lion's talons to not talons, but the claws to cut the skin, which he then wears as like light armor, right? Because it's basically bulletproof, right? So it's great armor and it's light, relatively speaking. So, 5 of his labors, he has to capture or relocate noxious animals. He has to go after Cerberus. He has to get the horses of Diomedes that are man-eating horses. He has to get the Erymanthian boar. So he's got a bunch of these labors that he has to do that deal with dangerous animals. And of course, there are boundaries, right? The first 6 labors all takes place on the Peloponnese, this southern Greece, and then in other parts of Greece, and then other parts of the Mediterranean. And the last 3 labors really take place at the edge, going for the golden apple of the Hesperides, going to get Cerberus. Those are really outside or at the edge of human experience. So he basically goes as far as you can and maybe a little beyond. He is also associated with establishing important cultural institutions. According to the myth, he's the one who institutes the games that will become the Olympic Games. Now, we know when the Olympic Games were established. They were established in 776 BCE. So we know exactly we know the very year when the Olympic Games were begun. Heracles is around 1250 BCE or so, in that ballpark. Obviously, he didn't actually institute the Olympic Games, not with that amount of time, but this becomes sort of the standard that he's the guy who started games, and eventually those became the Olympic Games. So the some labors affirm social norms. I'm not exactly sure how the Hydra does that. The Hydra is a monster that has, generally it has 9 heads. The problem is if you cut off a head, 2 more form, and so that becomes a problem. He needs the help of his cousin Aeolus, who singes the neck of the head that's been cut off, and that of course allows him to kill the Hydra. Now, Hydra is a water serpent. It's associated with a swampy area, so perhaps this reflects, Greek expansion into more swampy areas. And of course, if you've ever been in sort of swamps, you've got things like alligators and other creatures there that are sort of scary. And so maybe that's, what's going on. The victory over the Amazons basically has a male figure conquering the Amazons. And so this is a male-female thing with the male showing dominance. There's also the idea of the Greeks versus the non-Greeks. So the figure of Geryon takes place outside the Greek world. He's a monster that Heracles has to defeat. He's a triple-bodied or monster. He has a 2-headed dog. Then of course he goes to the underworld, and there you get the boundary between this world and the next. The apples of the Hesperides take place on the far west. Some people think we're talking about Spain. They're golden apples. I've heard some scholars think that it refers to the Greeks first tasting Valencia oranges. Their fruit, they're obviously of a different type from apples, but if what they knew were apples, then they get this fruit, they might see it as another type of apple. Um, Here we've got Heracles battling the Lernaean Hydra. You can see Heracles on the right. Heracles has got the club, and he's beating. He's apparently trying to beat the serpent to death. And then the figure on the side, I'm guessing is supposed to be Iolaus, and he is using like a little scythe to cut off the heads. But what we don't have here is we don't have the torch, which is how they stop the heads from growing. Here we have Heracles fighting against Hippolyta. How do we know this? Here we've got Heracles wearing the lion skin, right? He's got the lion's head over his own as a helmet, and he's got the lion skin. So this is clearly Heracles, and he's fighting women. That's the Amazons, right? You don't need any more than that. Women in armor and Heracles. That's who it is. And Hippolyta is the queen of the Amazons. He's supposed to get her war belt. Sometimes they call it the girdle of Hippolyta. They mean a belt. Here we've got Heracles fighting with Geryon, who has 3 bodies. I have to say, it's tough to know exactly what's going on. It almost looks like a skirmish between 3 people rather than Heracles. But so Heracles in the city, he's really sort of an outdoors guy, and so inside cultural bounds, that can be a danger. And this is one of the things with Greeks and heroes. Heroes are figures who do extraordinary things, but they don't have to be moral things. They don't even have to be good things. They don't even have to be things that help the city. So the difference between a hero and a monster is actually pretty slim in some ways. And within the city, where civilization is at its height, where people really have to abide by rules, right? You can't have the wild, wild west in the middle of, Metro Kansas City. That's not going to work. Cities, especially bigger cities, people have to get along, or else you're going to have total chaos. And so a figure like Heracles, that built up rage and so forth, could be a real problem. Now, Euripides wrote a play which we have called the Heracles. Sometimes it's called the Heracles-Maiamenos, Heracles Gone Mad. And the interesting thing about the play, so one of the things about Euripides' plays that is specific to him more than the other 2. Euripides' plays almost all begin with a prologue. And the prologue is usually delivered by a single character who comes out and delivers some sort of information, so we know how Euripides is going to approach this story. Sometimes those prologues are very straightforward. The one at the beginning of the Medea is very straightforward. It just gives you the story, the backstory. And there's nothing unusual in that version. That's pretty standard to the other versions we have. Some of Euripides' plays, the prologue indicates that Euripides is going to tell the story, but the story is going to be way different than any previous version. And the audience needs that information because the normal version that they're used to isn't what Euripides is going to tell. And there's a little bit of that in Heracles-Maiamenos. Here, Heracles has just completed his labors and is coming home to basically sort of retire. And he's driven mad by Hera, and he kills his wife and their kids. And the wife is Megara. So if you've seen the Disney Hercules, where he saves Megara, in this case, the Greek myth, he kills Megara. And there's no version in the Greek whatever sets him off. Does he go crazy on his own? Is he caused to go crazy by Hera? Um, doesn't matter. Megara dies. In most versions, that's the thing that causes him to do the labors, right? Because the labors are his way of atonement. Here he's already done them. And so um, the end result is what's going to sort of save him is that Theseus, his friend, is going to help him work through this because he's done this awful deed, but the world still needs the hero Heracles. And so Theseus is going to help him through that. And that's a sort of radical sort of way of looking at things because blood guilt was not, was not nothing. Um, so Sophocles, and the play really ends with Theseus basically convincing Heracles not to commit suicide, which is what he's thinking about doing because he's killed his wife and kids. Now he was crazy at the time, and we actually have an external figure of madness who causes Heracles to hallucinate, who doesn't even want to do that, right? This is Hera's gig, and she's the servant of Hera, so she has to do it. But she's not happy about it because she likes Heracles. She thinks he's a good guy. But it does end with him basically sort of bucking up, and somehow he's going to get on with his life. Now, Sophocles wrote a tragedy called the Trachiniae, the Women of Trachis, or the Trachinian Women. The backstory is as follows. Heracles is married to his second wife, Deianira. At one point, Deianira and Heracles come to a river that is difficult to cross. There is a centaur there named Nessus, and Nessus offers to carry Deianira across the river. Heracles, of course, is rough and tough, so he can sort of just ford the river, even though it's a pretty deep river and it's a stormy river. And when Nessus gets Deianira to the other side, he's basically going to run away with her. So Heracles can't allow that, right? He can't allow some centaur to take his wife. So he shoots Nessus with arrows and kills him. Now, the arrows had been dipped in the poison of the Hydra. The Hydra has poison in his system, so that Heracles has like a supply of that, and he dips his arrows in that. So it's even if you don't get a mortal wound, you're going to die anyways because there's poison in your system. Nessus knows he's dying. He then tells Deianira to take a little vial or and get some of his blood because his blood's coming out, and so just fill the vial and hold on to it. And one day when Heracles, his mind tends to wander and he might be looking for another wife, she can win him back by taking the blood, putting it on some garment that Heracles is going to wear. Heracles will be infused with love for his wife again. So that's the setup to the play. What does happen in the course of the play is that Deianira hears that Heracles has taken up with another woman named Iole, who is this beautiful sort of princess. And she's jealous and wants to make sure that Heracles remains faithful. So she sends him the shirt and he wore a garment of some sort. He puts the garment on. Because it's the centaur's blood that has been infected with this hydra poison, it's basically poisoned, although smearing it on the garment would seem to should have killed Deianira, but we're not supposed to, I think, imagine that. And the other thing is that the blood has some sort of adhesive power. So when he puts the garment on, it actually sticks to him, and he's dying of poison, and it's painful. And what he does is he convinces someone to build a pyre. He climbs to the top of the pyre and has it set aflame. And as he dies, his soul goes up to Mount Olympus, and he's sort of reborn as a god. So Heracles, at any rate, is a monstrous boundary breaker, right? He goes where no man has gone before. Theseus is an Athenian hero, and he is a democratic hero. Now, the interesting thing about Theseus is my personal belief is there was always a hero named Theseus that the Athenians told stories about for themselves. But the Theseus we know was a Theseus that was reconfigured after um, the creation of democracy and the discovery by a guy named Cimon of bones that were supposed to be Theseus's. Theseus did not die in Athens; he died on an island. There was people were sent to retrieve the bones of Theseus and bring them to Athens, and that happened in the 470s. 475, I think, is the usual date. I think that the stories we have are basically democratic Athens, which has now become a world power after, or a regional power after the Battle of Marathon. They don't really have a hero because Athens during the Mycenaean period was basically nothing. There was a city, but it was basically like a cow town. There was nothing important. And so what they want to do is they want to build their cred, and one way to do that is to take this obscure hero Theseus and build him up. There was a festival in Athens called the Paionopsia, and that festival basically involved young men going through things that were sort of reminiscent of Theseus and various labors or adventures that Theseus had. As a young person, Theseus has a series of adventures when he comes from Troezen to Athens. Now, Troezen is in southern Greece, and it is where Aegeus, Theseus's mortal father, who may or may not be his real father. There are some versions where Poseidon is Theseus's real father. But Aegeus has traveled to southern Greece. He has slept with this princess named Aethra, and Heracles grows up there. So when he gets to be, like, say, 16, Theseus, when he gets to be, say, 16 or so, his mom had been told to basically give him a message from his dad, and the message, because of course he hasn't seen his dad, and he's supposed to lift up this boulder, and under the boulder there's a sword, and there's some sort of instructions on what he's supposed to do to come see dad. So he gets that, and he goes on his journey to Athens, and on the way he defeats thieves and bandits and some monsters, but not wild animals, right? So the wild animal associated with him is the Minotaur, who is, of course, this mix between animal. And Theseus appears a lot in Euripides. He appears in a play by he appears in plays by all three, but we mainly have him in the plays of Euripides, where we have more plays. And he basically is a king, but he's a king who acts as if he were a democratically elected leader. So he's not sort of the overpowering sort of king that you would see in other stories. In Euripides' play Suppliant, this is a Oedipus story. Oedipus is the guy, killed his dad, married his mom, and in Sophocles' play, called the Oedipus at Colonus, he goes to die in Athens, and Theseus welcomes him in Athens, to Athens, and of course there was a shrine to Oedipus in Athens. So he represents hospitality. In the Suppliants, this is after the sons of Oedipus have killed one another in this battle to take Thebes, and the Theban ruler Creon refuses to bury the dead who attacked the city, and Theseus basically threatens to send an army to conquer Thebes if Thebes does not allow burial, which they do. So again, he shows hospitality, and he's a guy willing to do the right thing. So here we have Theseus approaching his father. This is his father Poseidon, right? Because you can see Poseidon there holding the trident. Um, this is a mixing bowl. This is the interior. We're looking into the middle of the bowl. So it looks like a wok. Showing the adventures of Theseus. Now, on the outer part, the circle around, these are the adventures he has on his way to Athens from Troezene. And my favorite one is near the bottom. You can see there's a little turtle. So the guy there, Skyron, was a monster who inhabited there was a mountain pass that he had to walk across, and it was a narrow mountain pass. And there was a guy there who would say, "Oh, my sandal's come undone. Would you fix my sandal?" And when you bent down to fix his sandal, he would then lift his foot and he would kick you, and you'd fall off the cliff and you'd land in the water where a man-eating turtle would attack you. And that's the figure there he's about. Theseus returns the favor and kicks him in, and there he is, and the turtle is coming for him. It's just the idea of a little turtle coming. Oh no, it's the turtle. I think it's just great. But you can read about what these other adventures are. In the middle, of course, we have Theseus dealing with the Minotaur. Theseus, when he gets to Athens and is recognized by his father because he's got the sword, he arranges to be one of the 14 youths who have to go to Crete. So every 7 years, the Athenians have to send 14 young people, 7 girls, 7 boys. We're talking like teens, like 14 to 16 or so. They have to go to Crete, where they are going to, in effect, be human sacrifices to the Minotaur. And this story may reflect a time when Crete was an important center and people sent hostages to Crete, where the young people of different Greek city-states would be trained in bull dancing, because that seems to have been one of the things. Bulls seem to have been worshipped on Crete, and one of the things was they had something like a bullfight, except you didn't kill the bull. What you did is young people would be in the ring with a bull, and they would dance, and then when the bull charged, these were people who were very athletic, and they could leap. They could grab the bull's horns and jump over the back, and that might have been sort of something that people was true to that culture, and that these foreign guests / hostages would learn. But of course, then that gets morphed into the Minotaur story, and it's an actual monster. The Minotaur is the child of Pasiphae, Minos' wife, and Poseidon's bull. What happened was Poseidon sent a bull from the sea for Minos to sacrifice, and it was a beautiful bull. And he basically said, this is the best bull I've ever seen, so I'm not going to kill it. What I'll do is I'll kill one of my other bulls, and then I'll keep this one, and of course then I'll have the greatest bulls all around. Poseidon, of course, is pissed off because this was his gift for sacrifice, and so this guy's basically thwarting the will of the gods. And then Poseidon managed to get Pasiphae to have this strong sexual urge to mate with the bull. The result is a monster, right? The Minotaur has a bull's head, has a human body, and that again may represent some sort of ritual that there was where someone wore a bull mask, right? If these are people who worship bulls, then there would be a ritual presumably where a human plays the bull in some ritual. But in the story, it's hidden in the labyrinth, this maze, and the people go in, they get lost, the Minotaur finds them and kills them. That's what happens. But Theseus manages to work with Ariadne, Minos' daughter, who's fallen in love with him, to give him a ball of twine, which he can unwind as he goes into the maze. So he's not going to lose his way, because all he has to do is follow the twine back. And she manages for there to be a sword, just inside the entrance. So he's now armed and he's able to defeat the Minotaur. Ariadne then has to leave with Theseus because she's disobeyed her father by helping Theseus. They end up at an island called Naxos, which is a small Greek island, and for some reason Theseus abandons her there. Now, in some versions of the story, she is a goddess, and she is not meant to be Theseus's bride, and so she's left there for that reason. But in the story as we have it, he just leaves her there, which is very strange. And the story of Ariadne is used on funeral sarcophagi as a sign of death, despair, and then rebirth. Because what happens to Ariadne when she sees Theseus has left her basically alone on this island, she is despairing and she is thinking of suicide. But then Dionysus shows up, and Dionysus makes her his wife. And so she thought her life was at an end, but it's actually a new beginning. And so you can see why that would appeal to be put on sarcophagi. The person's died. We think it's the worst thing that could ever happen, but there's a new life, right? That's the message. For some reason, Theseus marries Phaedra, who is Ariadne's sister. Okay, and he has a son, Hippolytus, who is the son of an Amazon. In some versions, it's Hippolyta herself. In other versions, it's one of the other Amazon women named Antiope. But whoever, he's named after the queen of the Amazons. He is like the Amazons. He's sort of like a virgin. And what that basically means, if you're a prince, you don't have the luxury to be a virgin. You don't have a luxury to basically say, I'm giving up the royal life. You have to do the royal life because one day we're going to need you as king. And he basically refuses that. So he's sort of like a Greek Peter Pan. And we saw his story, earlier in the chapter on Artemis. He is a worshiper of Artemis. That he angers Aphrodite. Aphrodite causes Phaedra to fall in lust for him, and she commits suicide and basically frames him for her death. And then Theseus curses his son. So Theseus is associated with foreign women. His local marriage does not have an heir, so that's a problem, because one of the king's first jobs is make sure you get an heir. It is actually why Aegeus went to southern Greece, because he also didn't have any heir, and he basically needed to get a son. And he dies in exile. Theseus does on this island. So. And in the Iliad, the king who took over after Theseus, he's the king who sends the Athenian forces to Troy. So here we have a black figure vase showing Theseus killing the Minotaur. You can see the Minotaur, and the figure, the woman on the behind Theseus. I'm guessing is supposed to be. Ariadne, and notice this is one of those eyeball drinking cups. Perseus, his defining adventure is with the Gorgon Medusa. Now, the Gorgon's head can be used then as a weapon to turn people into stone, right? That's the thing. If you look at in the eyes of the Gorgon of Medusa, at any rate, you turn into stone. Now, Perseus, his dad is Zeus, and his mom is Danae. She is the princess of Argos. Her father has heard a prophecy that Danae's son will kill him and take over, and he does not want that to happen, of course. And so he locks her in a bronze tower. Zeus comes to her in a shower of gold, which might be, I mean, in art, sometimes it's depicted as like golden coins, in some it's depicted as sort of rain, in some it's just depicted as a beam of light. But Zeus, at any rate, gets to Danae. She, of course, ends up becoming pregnant. And then when the king, Acrisius is the name of the king, when Acrisius finds out about this, fearing that what's going to happen, he takes his daughter and the baby son, puts them in a big box, which sort of serves as like a raft, and sets them on the sea. And the idea is he doesn't kill her directly, and he doesn't kill the kid directly, because of course that would involve blood guilt. But if you abandon them in some dangerous spot and they die, well, that's because the gods were okay with their deaths. Like, the gods could have saved them. So it's a sort of way of avoiding technical responsibility for the death. Of course, usually what happens is they get out of it, right? You come up with an elaborate ploy, and of course the person's got to get out of it. And so the thing actually doesn't sink, and it actually floats to an island called Seriphus. There they are rescued by a fisherman named Dictys. And Dictys is the brother of Polydectes, who is the king of Seriphus, the ruler. Polydectes wants to marry Danae, who I think does not want to marry him. At any rate, Perseus is not so crazy on it. And Polydectes gets Perseus to swear that he will get the head of Medusa. He sort of tricks Perseus into making this declaration that he will, get Medusa's head. And so he then goes to do that to basically save his mob from having to marry Polydectes. That's the setup. He gets gifts. Sometimes Athena gives him the gifts, but they include the winged sandals of Hermes, presumably a second pair. He also gets a scimitar, a curved sword. He gets a bag. And the word for the bag is called kibisis in Greek. It's only used of this bag, and we don't know exactly what that is, but it's, sometimes it's called a wallet, but it's basically a container to put Medusa's head in. So what exactly the kibisis is, we don't know, but it's a bag of some sort. He gets that. He gets the helmet of invisibility, and he gets a highly polished shield, which of course he can use as a mirror, so he can see Medusa when he kills her, but doesn't have to look directly at her, because then he will turn to stone. And he visits the Graii. These are the three old women. They share one eye and they share one tooth, and it gets passed around among them. And Perseus grabs hold of the eye and refuses to let it go unless they give him some information. So there's something like the weird sisters in Macbeth. They give him, they can prophesy the future, and they give him some information to help him do the mission. So this is an antifix. This would be attached to the corner of a building. Is a Medusa head, and this is what Medusa basically looks like. Mr. Yuck. It's very strange. This one actually has eye makeup on, which is sort of interesting. Medusa was originally beautiful. Poseidon actually had relations with her, and then his wife, Poseidon's wife, got jealous and had her turned into the monster. But in other versions, she's a sister to other Gorgons. Now, the other Gorgons are immortal, but Medusa is mortal for some reason. Perseus beheads Medusa, and he has the head, which he puts in the bag. He then is sailing around. For some reason, he ends up in Ethiopia. And there he rescues the princess Andromeda. Now, Andromeda's mom had said that she was more beautiful than some goddess, I think than Amphitrite, Poseidon's wife. this of course never goes well, and Poseidon sends a monster that's going to attack the city and basically kill everyone. But the monster will be sated by a virgin, and so Andromeda is basically set out on a cliff, and the monster is going to come and grab her, and the city will be saved, but of course Andromeda will be killed. Perseus happens upon the scene. He pulls out the Medusa head, turns the monster into the sea serpent into stone, and then rescues Andromeda, and they get married, and they live happily ever after. This is actually a hero story that actually ends happily ever after. He then goes back to Seriphus, where remember Polydectes is asked for the head, and Polydectes gets turned to stone as well. They go to Argos, and there are some athletic contests there, and Acrisius, the king, it may not even be Argos, it's maybe somewhere else, but Acrisius is there basically just disguised as a regular citizen, so he's not clearly the king of anything. And Perseus enters the contests, and he is in the discus throw, and he throws the discus wild, and it basically hits Acrisius, who's an old man, so it kills him. So the ironic thing is that Perseus did not intend to kill his grandfather. He still ends up killing his grandfather, and there's no way that the guy could avoid that in the story. But because he killed him, he can't become king of Argos. But his friend is the king of Tiryns, and they're able to switch kingdoms. So Perseus and Andromeda become the royal family of Tiryns, while the king of Tiryns takes over as the king of Argos, and that way the blood pollution thing is avoided. Even though it's an accident, it's still sort of iffy for the new king to be the guy who killed the old king. So here we have a cup, black figure cup, showing Perseus chasing Medusa. He's got the winged sandals. He's got presumably the helmet of invisibility. He does not have the shield interest in it, and he is looking directly at Medusa. But there's Medusa looking really sort of freaky, and she's winged, as she sometimes is. Medusa is occasionally depicted as a beautiful winged maiden, and in fact, there is a portrait bust of Medusa as a beautiful woman. And Freud had a little article. It's maybe about 8 to 10 pages long. It's pretty easy read. And his argument is that that's the whole point. In other words, she was a beautiful, attractive woman, and what would happen if a red-blooded male happens to see a beautiful woman? Of course, he becomes aroused, he gets an erection, so he turns to stone, and then that becomes sort of morphed into this monster thing. When Medusa's head is chopped off, from her shoulders come Chrysaor, this handsome golden man, and Pegasus. These are presumably the children of Poseidon, right? Poseidon is associated with horses. There are a couple of places where you can see this depicted. There is, and in the book, there's a sarcophagus, and the end of the sarcophagus actually has the birth scene of Chrysaor and Pegasus. Athena invents a flute to imitate the sound of the snakes associated with Medusa, with her snaky hair. She invents the flute, but then she blows on the flute. Her cheeks puff out. She catches a reflection of herself. She thinks she looks terrible that way, so she throws them away. And these are double flutes, so they're basically like two penny whistle things. And then someone else then picks that up, and that becomes their instrument. So monsters define the heroes who pursue and destroy them, right? There's this connection, and this you see in comic books. I mean, comic book heroes, especially in the 60s and 70s, often reflected on the fact that their very nature, the hero's very nature, as crime fighters, tended to cause villains who matched them in some way. We're like polar opposites of them, and so they're in this sort of ongoing dance. So here we have a red figure vase of Perseus avoiding the gaze of Medusa and chopping off her head. And there she looks, pretty attractive. This is not sort of the ugly, monstrous Medusa, but he's looking at Athena, who's wearing the helmet. That's how we know it's Athena. Sadly, this is the sarcophagus in question. But what's going on here? I'm not sure what's going on in these panels, but it's on one of the end panels that you have, and you can see it in your book. But sadly, they basically picked the wrong picture for this, because this portion here does not show the birth of Chrysaor and Pegasus. The literature is the chapter is Euripides, The Madness of Heracles, or Heracles Myomenos. He at the beginning, the play is beautifully structured. The opening, it is Megara, who has basically delivered the prologue. She basically says, when he went off on his adventures, Heracles left us with his king. That king now is trying to basically sort of rape Megara, and where is my savior? Where is Heracles? When will he come home and save us? And then he arrives, and there's great celebration because he saved the day. And then he goes into the house with the family, and then the figure of madness appears on the roof, with Iris, who basically says, you've got a job to do, which is to drive him crazy, and he's going to kill his family. So it's like, please save us. Then they're saved, and then they immediately are killed. It's like I think it's beautifully structured. It is actually it's one of Euripides' best plays, and I think it's just very well done. So Hera sends Lyssa to drive Heracles mad, and Heracles murders his family. Theseus comes in, and basically Heracles has killed his family, so he's a figure of great pollution. And Theseus comes in and said, "You saved me from the underworld. We've had adventures together. We went against the Amazons together. I am not going to abandon my friend." And it's really a powerful statement of the power of friendship against societal expectations. It's quite impressive. The theory section looks at monsters, and a guy named Jeffrey Jerome Cohen wrote a work called Monster Culture. It was an article, 7 theses, and there are 7 theses. There are 7 points that he is in which he's basically taught like what are monsters for, and he has 7 points that he makes. And you can look this up. If you look it up on the internet, you can find the PDF of the article, and you can read the whole article. It's not that long. But his view is that monsters basically define the cultures that they come from, because monsters are about the fears, they're about the things that culture does not want to be, and that helps to set the boundaries for what the culture actually is. And thesis 5, which is the one that is accepted, so excerpted. So we have all of thesis 5 is that monsters patrol the boundaries, right? They're the ones who separate what is good, what is normal, what is culture, with what is alien and outside, right? Here is the statuette of Heracles. This is actually, you can see a full-sized statue of Heracles that is this same, that is from this same piece. It's sort of Heracles as an older person. He's tired, and he's basically reclining against a a tree stump. He's leaning on it. He's got the lion skin there. Behind his back, he is holding the three apples of the Hesperides. He doesn't. The club is actually what he's leaning against. I'm sorry, and the lion skin is on top of that. But he basically looks like an old wrestler whose body started to go to seed. That's the way he looks. But if you look on the internet for the Farnese, Farnese, the Farnese Heracles or Hercules, you will see this very statue, but it's a full-fledged statue, and it's a copy of a Greek original. We don't have the original Greek statue. What we have is a Roman copy, and this too is also probably a Roman copy, but in gift shop size. The comparison section here looks at Seneca's play Hercules Furens, Hercules Gone Mad, or the Enraged Hercules. There are some differences in Euripides' play. We don't have madness as an exterior force. Hercules does kill his family. He does go crazy, but it's not sort of an external thing. And Seneca was a Roman author. He was a teacher to Nero. He then was basically something like Nero's Secretary of State for several years. He was the richest man in Rome who was not part of the royal family. And he was also a Stoic philosopher. Now, Stoicism preaches the importance of self-control, right? That we often are driven to do things that are bad for us because of fears. Fears, of course, are illusory because what we fear hasn't happened yet. So it's silly to be afraid of something when you haven't actually encountered it. And, I think a lot of people, they suffer fears and then something happens and it's like, was that it? Why was I afraid for so long, right? So that it's not a bad idea. Now, there are some really bad things that you should be sort of worried about and afraid of. But if you lean into the fear, what happens is it actually makes you less safe because you're not dealing with the situation you're in when whatever the fear was comes upon you. And so better is just to be ready for just about anything, and then when it comes, you deal with it. And maybe it kills you, maybe something bad happens, but the point, you didn't spend all that time worrying about it. Okay, so that's really what Stoicism is all about. So excessive emotion and fear are the big things in Stoicism that you have to sort of get rid of that because they don't do you any good. And Hercules, the Roman pronunciation of Heracles, it's the same. In this case, it's not that there's a Roman Hercules who's the equivalent of the Greek Heracles. Hercules is Heracles. It's the same guy. It's just that the Romans pronounced it Hercules and the Greeks pronounced it Heracles. So it's like transposition of syllables. That's what's going on. That's it. But here, the madness of Heracles, that's an excessive emotion, and of course it leads to disaster. And then Hercules has to somehow still get on with his life because the Stoics are all about duty. And Seneca himself was all about duty. I mean, he tried to be sort of a good minister to Nero, and during the time that, during the early reign of Nero was actually a good emperor, in part because Seneca was one of his advisors. But as Nero got crazier and Seneca lost sort of his power and influence, then of course Seneca himself had to commit suicide. And the story of his suicide is we have accounts of his suicide, and he basically takes the suicide in stride. I mean, he's an old man for one thing, so when you're old, how much more life do you have? And are you going to basically debase yourself to get more years, or are you going to basically say, well, I've lived my life, I've had my life, I've had my chance? And Seneca dies the way a Stoic should. He's pretty chill with the whole idea. The reception, or the Nachleben section, sadly deals with Hercules in New York, film with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's actually Arnold Schwarzenegger's first feature film. He was in a documentary called Pumping Iron, and then he decided to become an actor. And Hercules in New York is god awful. Hercules movies generally are bad. There are a lot of Italian Hercules movies that were then badly dubbed. I love bad Hercules movies. I have no problem watching those Italian movies that are really awful. I mean, they're a hoot. They're a lot of fun to watch. They're bad, but they're funny. I had a chance to watch Hercules in New York about 15 years ago, and maybe a little bit long because it was on videotape. And I think the library had it, so I said, okay, it's time for me to bite the bullet and watch this thing. I get through about 20 minutes of it, and it's like, God, I can't watch this. It was that bad. And I'm someone who likes bad movies, so one day I might be brave enough and watch the whole thing. But um, so you've got Hercules, him playing Hercules. He comes to New York for some reason, and he basically hangs around with a cab driver played by Arnold Stang. It's like, what the hell? Um, but Schwarzenegger, of course, is a big guy, and a lot of his comedy, a lot of the comic things in here is him leaning into that, right? His bigness. Um, and that does tie to stories about Heracles. There's the story of Heracles and the Kekropes. The Kekropes are twins. They're like dwarves or something or other, and they're basically trickster figures, and they're causing trouble. And they trick Hercules in some way, and he basically grabs hold of them and he binds them and he puts them on a stick. So he's carrying them on a stick and they're hanging down on the back of the stick. And Heracles is wearing like this short tunic, and so as he walks, the tunic actually rides up and his butt is showing. And the Kekropes, I think this is the funniest thing ever. And Heracles, basically starts laughing himself. He lets them go, and then I think they turn into monkeys or something. So it's a rather strange story, but it's a comic story about Heracles. There's also a story where Heracles dresses up as a woman, which is what the reference to Junior is. Junior is a movie. I have not seen it. I'm not sure I ever will, but Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a guy who gets pregnant. So he starts dressing as a woman and so forth in it. So it's the same type of thing. It's not actually a Heracles story, but I would recommend, if you're going to look at Hercules movies. I think the Dwayne Johnson movie that came out a few years ago I thought was excellent. I like that quite a lot. I would recommend that. Also, if you want a bad Hercules movie but that's fun to watch, is Hercules with Steve Reeves. It was an Italian movie. Reeves was an American bodybuilder. That's fun. There are a couple sequels to that with Steve Reeves. Those are all of those are fun. There is a really bad one that came out in the 80s called Hercules with Lou Ferrigno. It was made in Italy. That one is it's a hot mess. I mean, that movie looks like a bunch of Italian writers got together, went to a bar, got totally plastered, and then tried to construct a script about Hercules. Because it's like there are all these details in there that sort of fit but don't quite, and it really looks like it was like Hercules didn't he fight like a dog or something? And like, yeah, I think that the dog had 3 heads. Yeah, that's great. And like, but wouldn't it be great if it was like a robot dog? And I'm like, oh yeah, man, it'd be like R2-D2 but a dog. Yeah, and then you end up with the movie. It's yeah. When I saw Hercules 2, Hercules was made as a 4-hour movie, then it was released as 2 movies. Hercules 2 with Lou Ferrigno. When I saw that, I saw it in Champaign, Illinois. I was at the University of Illinois at the time. in Champaign, Illinois, and I saw it at the Virginia Theater. The Virginia Theater is a movie palace that seats 1,600. I went to it on opening night, and there were, until the movie started, I was the only person in the audience. When the movie started, another guy showed up and doubled the audience size. The number of people who worked at the theater, 6. So the employees outnumbered the number of people, and this is in a huge cavernous movie theater. That did not even last a week. So I'm glad I went on opening night because I would have missed it.